My baby. The millionaire arrived in secret and was shocked to see the nanny with his daughter. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's begin. It was almost 1 in the morning when the electronic gate of the Atlantic Mars Tower opened silently. In the South Beach neighborhood of Miami, the humid February heat still hung in the air despite the breeze coming from the ocean. Edward Tavares parked his black car with tinted windows in the numbered spot and turned off the engine. For a moment, he remained motionless, absorbing the silence that contrasted with the turbulent weeks of travel. An executive at one of the largest digital security companies in the Southeast, Edward was returning from international engagements without telling anyone. The exhaustion was visible on his face, but something stronger had brought him back ahead of schedule, an impulse that not even he understood. After 3 weeks in Europe closing contracts and attending cybersecurity conferences, his body begged for rest, but his mind demanded something else: presence. He grabbed his executive briefcase from the passenger seat and got into the elevator. As he ascended to the 12th floor, he adjusted his already loose tie and ran a hand through the graying hair at his temples, which contrasted with the still dominant black at 45. The elevator mirror revealed deep dark circles, the result of sleepless nights and changing time zones. The elevator door opened directly into his apartment's foyer. He inserted the key carefully, turning it slowly so as not to make any noise. He knew that Sophia, his 6-year-old daughter, and Jane, the nanny hired temporarily for the period of his trip, would be sleeping at that hour. Upon opening the door, he was greeted by the familiar silence of his apartment, but also by an unexpected aroma of chocolate coming from the kitchen. Intrigued, he left his suitcase in the entryway and followed the hallway with slow steps. The dimness was broken only by a soft light coming from the end of the hall. As he got closer, he heard a low murmur, almost like a lullaby. He stopped at the kitchen entrance, hidden by the shadow. The scene he saw completely paralyzed him. Janae was sitting on the kitchen floor with Sophia asleep in her lap. The nanny was humming softly as she stroked the girl's curly hair. Beside them, on a small stool improvised as a table, was a tray with still steaming chocolate pancakes and 2 half-empty glasses of milk. In the sink, stacked utensils indicated they had prepared the meal together. It wasn't just the scene itself that unsettled him, but the intimacy it revealed. Sophia's face showed a serenity Edward hadn't seen in a long time, not since the accident that had taken his wife Marcia 2 years ago. Jane's gaze, on the other hand, displayed a spontaneous sweetness, without any trace of artificiality. Her movements were precise and delicate, as she wiped a small chocolate smudge from the corner of the girl's mouth. Edward remained motionless, unable to announce his presence. He watched how Jane looked at every detail of the kitchen, with an emotional, not just functional familiarity, as if that space was already part of her, as if Sophia wasn't just the boss's daughter. Janae Silva was 36 and had come from a small town in Florida, Apalachicola. A former elementary school teacher, she had moved to Miami in search of better opportunities. A single mother to Tiana, a 15-year-old teenager who had stayed with her grandmother in Apalachicola, she had accepted the temporary nanny job while trying to save money to bring her daughter over and pay for her college. What had started as a job out of necessity had turned into something deeper, a bond she herself had not expected to form. Not wanting to interrupt that moment, Edward silently retreated and went back to the entryway. He picked up his suitcase and made a point of opening and closing the door more audibly this time. "Is someone there?" Jane's voice came from the kitchen, now alert. "It's me." "Jane, I'm back early," Edward replied, trying to sound casual as he walked down the hall again. When he entered the kitchen, Jane had already stood up with Sophia in her arms. There was a surprised expression on her face, framed by curly hair tied in a makeshift bun. "Mr. Tavares." "Wow, we weren't expecting you until next week," she said, adjusting Sophia, who continued to sleep soundly. "I managed to move up some appointments," he lied. In truth, he had cancelled 2 important meetings to come back sooner. "But what are you two doing awake at this hour?" Jane smiled, a sincere smile that lit up her brown eyes. Sophia had a nightmare. She dreamed about her mom. She got very upset. Since she couldn't get back to sleep, we came to make chocolate pancakes. It's what my mom used to do when I had nightmares. Edward felt a tightness in his chest. Sophia rarely spoke about Marcia, and he himself avoided the topic, unsure how to deal with his own grief, let alone his daughter's. It worked. "She seems to be sleeping soundly now," he commented, moving closer to look at his daughter. Yes, after talking a bit about the dream and eating pancakes, she relaxed. "I was just about to take her back to her room." "I can do that," Edward offered, extending his arms. As she tried to pass the girl to her father's arms, Sophia whimpered in her sleep and clung tighter to Janet's neck. "Nana, stay," the girl murmured, still asleep. The awkward moment hung between them. Edward slowly lowered his arms, feeling a pang of jealousy and inadequacy he hadn't expected. "I'd better take her, she's used to me now," Janet whispered, with an apologetic expression. "You must be tired from your trip." Edward nodded in silence, stepping aside to let her pass. "I'll take a shower then." "Thank you, Janet." As the nanny carried Sophia to her room, Edward was left alone in the kitchen, observing the remnants of the small nocturnal feast. He picked up one of the pancakes and took a distracted bite. It was delicious. Without realizing it, his eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just for the taste of the food, but for what that scene represented. Someone had filled a space in his house, in his family, that had been empty for so long. That night, lying in his bed unable to sleep, Edward confronted an uncomfortable truth. He had emotionally distanced himself from Sophia since Marcia's passing. He had plunged into work, travel, endless meetings. Guilt consumed him now, seeing how his daughter had found comfort in the arms of a stranger who, in just a few weeks, seemed to know Sophia better than he did. The next morning, Edward woke up late, having finally fallen asleep as the sun was rising. As he left his room, he was greeted by the aroma of fresh coffee and cheerful voices coming from the kitchen. He stopped again in the hallway, now lit by the morning light streaming through the large living room windows. Sophia was sitting at the kitchen table, swinging her legs in the air while Janet prepared breakfast. The girl wore a yellow dress, and her hair was carefully braided into 2 pigtails. She was talking excitedly about a cartoon she had watched the day before. "And then the princess discovered she could talk to animals, Jana. Just like you talked to the mockingbird on the balcony." Janet laughed as she precisely cut fruit. "That mockingbird is a real chatterbox. Only you and I understand what he says, right?" Sophia nodded seriously, as if they shared an important secret. It was then that she noticed her father standing at the kitchen entrance. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, but without the enthusiasm Edward had hoped for. There was a certain formality in her greeting, as if she were addressing a distant uncle or a teacher. "Good morning, Princess." "Good morning, Janet," he said, entering the kitchen. "Good morning, Mr. Tavares. The coffee is almost ready," Janet replied, seeming slightly uncomfortable with his presence. "Sophia has already had her bath and is ready for the day." Edward sat at the table, observing the dynamic between the two. There was an evident synchrony, private codes and jokes they had developed in the weeks of his absence. He felt like an intruder in his own home. "Jana makes my hair like Tiana's, Daddy," Sophia said, touching her braids. She showed me a picture. "Tiana is beautiful." "Tiana?" Edward asked, confused. "My daughter," Jani explained, placing a cup of strong coffee in front of him. "I showed Sophia some pictures. I hope you don't mind." "No, of course not," he replied automatically, though he felt a pang of discomfort. He had hired Jani with only basic references and a brief interview before his trip. He knew she had a daughter, but he had never asked for details. "When is Tiana coming to visit us, Jana?" Sophia asked, while biting into an apple cut into the shape of a bunny. Edward noticed how the fruit was arranged on the plate, apples in the shape of bunnies, oranges in stars, bananas decorated with colorful cereal. A level of care he had never had. "Maybe one day, sweetie," Janet answered, exchanging a quick glance with Edward. "Now finish your breakfast. We don't want to bother your father so early in the morning." "You're not bothering me," Edward said, trying to seem relaxed. "What have you two been up to while I was away?" It was like opening the floodgates. Sophia began to talk non-stop about trips to the park, the stories Janet read to her, the recipes they prepared together, the school tasks that were now fun. With each new piece of information, Edward felt a mixture of gratitude and pain. Gratitude for seeing his daughter happy again. Pain for not being the one responsible for this transformation. After breakfast, while Sophia played in the living room, Edward called Janet for a conversation on the balcony. The apartment overlooked the south. Beach sea and the ocean breeze gently swayed the plants decorating the outdoor space. "Janae, I want to thank you for what you've done for Sophia," he began, not knowing exactly how to express his conflicting feelings. "I see she's different. Sophia is an incredible child, Mr. Tavares," Janae replied with a sparkle in her eyes. "She just needed attention, someone to really listen to her." The sentence contained no accusation, but Edward felt it as such. "You seem to have experience with children. Besides your own daughter, I mean." Janae smiled, leaning against the balcony railing. "I was a teacher for 12 years in Apalachicola, literacy and the first years of elementary school. I loved my job, but..." She hesitated. "The salaries in that part of Florida aren't enough to raise a teenager alone. Tiana wants to go to medical school." "Medical school?" Edward was surprised. "That's an expensive course." "Very expensive," Janae agreed with a sigh. "That's why I took this job. It pays better than being a teacher, unfortunately." Edward felt a pang of guilt. He had never given much thought to Janae's personal life, her motivations, her sacrifices. "And your daughter is with whom now?" "With my mother, Mrs. Josephine. They get along well, but..." Janae looked toward the horizon at the sea stretching into the distance. "It's hard to be away. We video chat every day. Sophia sometimes joins the calls." Again, Edward was surprised by how much he didn't know about his daughter's routine in recent weeks. "Mr. Tavares, I know the agreement was for me to stay only during your trip," Janae continued, turning to face him again. "I can pack my things today if you prefer." The idea of Janae leaving his house caused a jolt in Edward. He imagined Sophia returning to the silent sadness of the previous months, the sleepless nights, the barely touched lunches. "No," he said, more emphatically than he intended. "I mean, if you could stay a while longer. Sophia clearly likes you very much, and I need to reorganize myself after the trip. We can discuss the terms." The relief on Janae's face was evident. "Of course, no problem. I was enjoying staying here. Sophia is special to me." The rest of the day passed with Edward, observing the interaction between Sophia and Janae like an anthropologist studying an unknown culture. He saw how Janae knew exactly when Sophia needed space and when she needed a hug. How she respected the girl's little quirks, like lining up all her toys before putting them away, or singing a certain song while brushing her teeth. In the late afternoon, when they went to the park near the building, Edward noticed that Sophia always ran to Janae when she wanted to show something interesting she found. A leaf with an unusual shape, a colorful insect, a shiny rock. Only occasionally did the girl turn to him, and when she did, it was with a formality that broke his heart. Back at the apartment during dinner, Edward found more signs of Janae's presence in his home. A colorful activity chart on the kitchen wall, with stars marking Sophia's completed tasks. A collection of drawings held by magnets on the refrigerator. Children's books neatly organized on a previously empty shelf in the living room, but it was only when he went to put Sophia to bed that he saw the most significant one. In his daughter's room, on top of the dresser, was a framed photograph of Marcia that he hadn't seen in months. Beside it, a small candle already half consumed. "Jana put Mommy's picture here," Sophia said, already tucked under the covers. "She said this way Mommy can watch me sleep every night and send me beautiful dreams." Edward swallowed hard, unable to respond. "Jana said that when we can't see a person anymore, they become a star in the sky," Sophia continued, looking at the ceiling, where fluorescent stickers formed a small constellation. "That big one is Mommy. Jana put it there for me." Sitting on the edge of his daughter's bed, Edward felt tears burn his eyes. He hadn't spoken about Marcia with Sophia since the funeral. He hadn't known how to approach the subject, how to explain the inexplicable to a small child. And now this woman, this stranger who had entered their lives so recently, had found the right words, the necessary gestures. "It's a very beautiful star," was all he could manage, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a star too." "Daddy," Sophia said, pointing to a smaller sticker next to the big one, "and I have that tiny one." Jana said that even when people are far away, their stars stay close together in the sky. Edward kissed his daughter's forehead, lingering a little longer than usual. When he stood up, he saw Janae standing in the doorway, watching the scene with a serene expression. "Good night, Princess," he said. "Good night, Daddy." "Good night, Jana," Sophia replied. pulling the blanket up to her chin. "Sweet dreams, my love," Janae said, approaching to adjust the pillows. In the hallway, out of Sophia's earshot, Edward stopped Janae with a gesture. "Marcia's photo, the story about the star," he began, unsure how to continue. Janae looked him in the eyes, not looking away. "Sophia needed a way to keep her mother present, Mr. Tavares. She was afraid of forgetting her face, and she needed to understand what happened in a way that made sense for a child. I should have done that," he said, running a hand over his tired face. "I'm her father." "You were grieving too," Janae replied with a kindness that completely disarmed him. "Sometimes we need someone from the outside to help us find our way back." That night, Edward took a long time to fall asleep again, but for different reasons. His mind was buzzing with thoughts about what had happened to his family over the last 2 years, about how he had neglected Sophia's grief while trying to manage his own. And mainly about the woman sleeping in the guest room, a stranger who in a few weeks had achieved what he couldn't in 2 years, bringing some light back into his daughter's eyes. As sleep finally began to take hold, a certainty formed in his mind. He couldn't let Janae go, at least not yet. Not when Sophia finally seemed to be finding some balance. The complications that this decision might bring would be problems for the Edward of the future. For now, he just wanted his daughter to keep smiling like she had smiled today, even if it wasn't for him. The following weeks brought a new routine to the apartment on the South Beach waterfront. Edward resumed his work at the Protex security office, but made a point of shortening his days to be home before dinner. Janae, no longer a temporary employee, officially took on the role of Sophia's full-time nanny. With a formal contract and a salary she considered far too generous. "Mr. Tavares, this is almost triple what I earn as a teacher," she said, embarrassed upon seeing the offer. They were sitting on the balcony one evening after Sophia had gone to bed. "It's the fair value for the work you're doing," he replied firmly. He didn't mention that he had consulted his company's human resources department to understand the market rate for a professional like her. "Are you hiring a nanny or a governess?" his assistant had asked with a raised eyebrow. Edward hadn't known how to answer. "Still, it's a lot of money," Janae insisted. "I can't—" "Think about your daughter, her college," Edward interrupted, using the argument he knew would work. "The more you save now, the sooner you can bring her to Miami." Janae finally accepted. That same night, she had a video call with Tiana, telling her the news. Sophia made a point of participating, talking non-stop about how much she wanted to meet the older sister she had heard so much about. Edward watched the scene from a distance, feeling simultaneously part of and on the sidelines of that joy. Janae's constant presence gradually transformed the apartment. Meals were now prepared with care and had southern flavors that delighted Sophia. Weekends gained special schedules, visits to the Perez Art Museum, Miami, outings to South Point Park, trips to the movies at Aventura Mall. Edward began to participate more, discovering a city that, despite living there for years, he had never really explored since Marcia was gone. In his office, on the 22nd floor of a commercial building in the Brickell district, Edward tried to focus on a proposal for a new client, but his thoughts were at home. For the past few nights, he had been observing how Sophia no longer asked, "When is Jana leaving?" as she had in the first few days. Now Janae's presence was simply accepted as permanent in her childish mind. His office door opened after a light knock, and Fernanda, his assistant of over 8 years, entered with a folder of documents. "The Gulf Coast Energy contracts for you to sign," she said, placing the folder on his desk. Then she stopped and watched him attentively. "Are you okay, Edward? You seem distant." Fernanda was the only person in the company who called him by his first name, a privilege earned after years of working together and sharing a few crises, including the most difficult period after Marcia's accident. "I'm fine. Just thinking about a few things," he replied evasively. Fernanda pulled up a chair and sat down uninvited. "Is it about the nanny? Janae, right?" Edward frowned, surprised. "How do you know about her?" Fernanda smiled wryly. "You've been talking about nothing but her for weeks. Jani did this with Sophia. Jani taught her that. Jani solved this problem." Edward felt his face flush like a teenager caught in the act. "She's a good professional," he defended himself. "I imagine so," Fernanda agreed with a tone that suggested more than her words. "And how is Sophia adapting to this new dynamic?" Surprisingly well. In fact, I haven't seen her this happy since Marcia. The sentence hung in the air unfinished. Even after 2 years, it was hard to verbalize the absence. That's great, Edward, Fernanda said with sincerity. Then she leaned forward slightly. And how are you adapting? The question caught him off guard. How was he adapting? In recent days, he found himself watching Janae more than he should. He noticed details like the way she tied her hair up when cooking, or how her face transformed when she laughed with Sophia, or how her southern accent was more pronounced when she was tired. I'm fine, he answered unconvincingly. It's strange having someone living with us, but Sophia needs her. Only Sophia? Fernanda asked with a knowing smile. Edward, it's been 2 years. You're young, an attractive, successful man. Life goes on. It's not that, he denied too quickly. Janae is an employee. That's all. Fernanda stood up, shrugging. If you say so, she commented, heading for the door. Before leaving, she turned. Just don't forget that employees don't look at their bosses the way you said she looked at you that day at the park. How did you describe it again? As if I were more than just Sophia's father? The door closed, leaving Edward alone with his increasingly confused thoughts. He remembered the previous Sunday, when they had taken Sophia to the park. The girl was running around happily, and Edward had sat on a bench watching. Janae sat next to him, both silent for a few minutes until she commented on how Sophia seemed stronger, more confident. It's thanks to you, he had said, and then for a brief moment, their eyes had met in a different, deeper way. An instant that lasted only a few seconds, but that he had replayed several times since. That same afternoon, arriving home earlier than usual, Edward found the apartment silent. He left his briefcase and blazer on the living room sofa and walked down the hall. The door to Sophia's room was ajar and he peeked in. The girl was lying down, sleeping peacefully. A mild cold had kept her home from school for the past 2 days. The guest room door, now officially Janae's room, was closed. Edward hesitated for a moment, then knocked softly. "Janae?" he called out. The door opened and Janae appeared, wearing sweatpants and a simple t-shirt. Her hair was down, falling over her shoulders in defined curls. "Mr. Tavares, you're home early," she said, surprised. Sophia finally fell asleep. Her fever is down, but she was restless. "Thank you for taking care of her," he replied, feeling suddenly uncomfortable. I wanted to ask you something." "Of course." Janae opened the door wider, revealing a tidy room, with a few books on the nightstand and a framed photograph of a smiling teenager, whom Edward presumed was Tiana. "Tomorrow there's a company mixer, a cocktail party to celebrate closing the contract with Gulf Coast Energy," he began, feeling strangely nervous. "I don't usually take Sophia. It's a very adult and formal environment, but I can stay with her." "No problem," Janae completed, helpful as always. "Actually, I was wondering if you would like to go with me." The words came out faster than he'd planned. "We can leave Sophia with Denise, my neighbor on the 11th floor. She's always offering to watch Sophia." Janae looked genuinely surprised. Her lips parted, but no sound came out immediately. Edward hurried to clarify. "It would be nice to have company, you know? These events are always tedious, and I thought it might be an opportunity for you to see a bit more of Miami, of my work." He was rambling, and he knew it. Janae saved him with a soft smile. "I'd be happy to accompany you, Mr. Tavares," she finally replied, "but I don't have suitable clothes for a corporate cocktail party." Edward felt a disproportionate sense of relief at her positive response. "Don't worry about that. There's a great store at Aventura Mall. We can stop by there tomorrow morning before the event. Consider it a bonus to your salary." Janae seemed to hesitate, but eventually agreed with a nod. "Okay, thank you for the invitation." The next morning, after leaving Sophia with an excited Denise, "Finally, you're getting out for a bit, Edward?" they headed to the mall. The experience of choosing a dress for Janae was surprisingly pleasant. Edward, used to being objective and practical in his shopping, found himself appreciating the way Janae considered each option, how she cared about the details, how she moved with natural grace when trying on the styles. Finally, she chose a navy blue dress, elegant without being flashy, that complemented her dark skin and well-proportioned body. Edward insisted that she also choose shoes and a small handbag. "Mr. Tavares, this is too much," she protested, as the saleswoman set the items aside. "Please, Just call me Edward, he asked for the third time that day. The mister makes me feel like I'm 70. Janae smiled somewhat awkwardly. It's a hard habit to break in, Edward. His name in her voice sounded different, more personal, and for a moment they both seemed overly aware of their proximity in the small store. The cocktail party was scheduled for 7 p.m. at an exclusive rooftop in the Wynwood neighborhood. Edward picked Janae up at 6:30 p.m. Sophia was entertained with Denise, making Play-Doh at the kitchen table, and barely noticed them leave. In the elevator, heading down to the parking garage, Edward couldn't help but admire how different Janae looked. The dress fit perfectly, her hair was up in an elegant bun, and she had applied light makeup that highlighted her features. "You look beautiful," he said, unable to contain the compliment. Janae looked down but smiled. "Thank you. It's been a long time since I've dressed up like this." The event was crowded when they arrived. The rooftop offered a panoramic view of the Art Deco historic district, with the Miami River winding between the historic buildings. Waiters circulated with glasses of champagne and trays of canapes. Edward guided Janae among the guests, introducing her to a few closer colleagues as Sophia's nanny, a description that, for the first time, felt insufficient to his own ears. The reactions to Janae's presence were varied. Fernanda, upon meeting them, greeted Janae with exaggerated enthusiasm. "I finally get to meet the famous Jana. Sophia and Edward talk about you so much, I feel like I'm already your friend." Other looks were more calculating. Edward noticed some whispers, sideways glances. He realized that regardless of his intentions, bringing Janae into that environment created a narrative he hadn't anticipated. The situation became clear when Richard Mendoza, one of the company's oldest partners, approached with his wife, Veronica. "Edward, my dear fellow, what a pleasure to finally meet your companion," Richard said, extending a hand to Janae. "Actually, Janae is my daughter Sophia's nanny," Edward corrected, feeling his face heat up. Veronica, a woman in her 50s with ostentatious jewelry and a perpetually suspicious expression, examined Janae from head to toe. "Oh, the nanny," she repeated with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How unusual to bring her to a corporate event." Edward felt Janae tense beside him. "Janae is practically family now," he replied, instinctively placing a hand on her back, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed. When Richard and Veronica walked away, Edward noticed Janae had turned pale. "Let's get something to drink," he suggested, guiding her to the bar. "Don't mind Veronica. She's always been a difficult person." "I think it was a mistake for me to come," Janae murmured, holding the glass of champagne Edward handed her. "People are thinking—" She didn't complete the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. Edward knew exactly what people were thinking. That Janae was more than a nanny, that there was something between them, that she was an opportunist who saw a chance to change her life with a lonely, successful widower. "It doesn't matter what they think," he said with more conviction than he actually felt. "You've been wonderful with Sophia, and that's all that matters to me." The evening continued with Edward trying to balance his social obligations with his concern for making Janae feel comfortable. He introduced her to more approachable people, encouraged her to try the exquisite dishes served at the buffet, and explained details about the company and its projects. Gradually, Janae seemed to relax, even engaging in conversations about education with some guests. That's when Cristina Almeida, Edward's ex-girlfriend from before his marriage to Marcia and the current legal director of the company, approached them. Tall, elegant, and sharp-tongued, Cristina had never hidden her continued interest in Edward, especially after he became a widower. "Edward, it's been a while," she greeted, completely ignoring Janae. "You've been missing from our happy hours." "I've been busy, Cristina," he replied, feeling the tension return. "This is Janae, Sophia's nanny." Cristina shot a quick glance at Janae, enough to assess and dismiss her as a threat. "Nanny? I thought you came with a real date," she commented with a malicious smile. "We miss you at social gatherings, you know. Especially me." Her tone was clearly flirtatious, and her hand rested on Edward's arm, squeezing lightly. "I need to use the restroom," Janae said suddenly, stepping away before Edward could respond. "She seems adequate for Sophia," Cristina commented when they were alone. "But you need something more for yourself, Edward. It's been 2 years." "It's not that simple," he replied, uncomfortable. "It can be if you let it," she insisted, moving. Closer. How about dinner, just the two of us, next week? Like old times. Edward hesitated. Before Janae's arrival, he might have considered the invitation. Christina was attractive, intelligent, independent, the type of woman who had always interested him. But now, for some inexplicable reason, the idea of a date with her felt wrong. Thanks, Christina. But I don't think that's a good idea, he finally replied. Her face hardened for a moment, but she quickly recovered her calculated smile. Is it because of her? She asked, tilting her head in the direction Janae had gone. Edward, please, don't tell me you've fallen for that cliché. The boss and the help? It's nothing like that. He defended himself, feeling a growing irritation. Janae is a professional whom I respect very much, and I don't like the tone you're using. Christina raised her hands in a gesture of false surrender. As you wish. But when you realize you need someone on your level, you know where to find me. When she walked away, Edward took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. He looked around for Janae but couldn't find her. He went to the women's restroom and asked a woman coming out if she had seen a woman in a navy blue dress. The answer was negative. Worried, he scanned the room until he found her on the outer balcony, alone, watching the city lights. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. Janae, is everything okay? She turned, and Edward noticed she had been crying. Her eyes were slightly red, though she had tried to fix her makeup. Sorry, I just needed some air, she replied, forcing a smile. Too many people, too much noise. Edward knew it wasn't just that, but he respected her excuse. We can leave if you want, he offered. Janae shook her head. I don't want to spoil your evening. This event is important for you, I know. You're not spoiling anything, he assured her, moving closer. In fact, you're the only person I really want to be here with. The words came out unfiltered, and Edward saw Janae's eyes widen slightly. There was a moment of dense silence between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Your ex-girlfriend is very beautiful, Janae commented finally, changing the subject. Christina, right? How do you know she's my ex? Janae gave a sad smile. The way she looked at you. The way she touched your arm. The way she sized me up. Some things are universal regardless of social class. Edward felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't realized how difficult the night could be for Janae, exposed to an environment so different from hers, being judged at every turn. I'm so sorry about all this, he said sincerely. It was selfish of me to bring you here. I didn't think about how uncomfortable it could be. It wasn't selfish, she replied, surprising him. It was kind. You wanted to include me, to show me your world. I'm the one who isn't ready for it. Her honesty touched him deeply. Without a second thought, Edward reached out and touched Janae's face, a gentle gesture that made her hold her breath. You are more than ready, he murmured. It's these people here who don't deserve to know someone like you. For an instant, the world seemed to slow down. Edward felt an almost irresistible urge to lean in and kiss Janae right there, on the balcony, under the Miami stars. His body moved slightly forward, and he noticed that she didn't pull back. Edward! Richard's voice echoed behind them, breaking the moment. Come, the president of Gulf Coast Energy wants to meet you. It's crucial for the contract. Edward closed his eyes for a second, frustrated by the interruption. When he opened them again, he saw that Janae had taken a step back, composing herself. Go, she said with a gentle smile. It's important. We'll talk at home, he promised, before reluctantly walking away. The rest of the night passed in a blur of professional conversations and forced networking. Edward tried to finish his commitments as quickly as possible, but by the time he finally broke free, it was already past 11 p.m. He found Janae sitting on one of the sofas in the lounge, talking politely with one of the company's secretaries. Ready to go? He asked, relieved to see her more at ease. In the car, the silence between them was thick but not uncomfortable. Both seemed absorbed in their own thoughts, processing the night's events. Edward thought about the moment on the balcony, the near kiss. What would have happened if Richard hadn't interrupted? Janae looked out the window, watching the Miami streets pass by quickly. When they arrived at the building, they rode the elevator, still in silence. Denise greeted them with a tired smile, informing them that Sophia had been asleep for hours after a long period of playing. After she left, Edward and Janae were alone in the living room. Do you want some tea? Janae offered, always practical. I can make some before I go to bed. "Janny," Edward called, ignoring the offer. "About what happened on the balcony." She stopped, her back to him, her hands clutching the small purse that matched her dress. "We don't have to talk about it," she said, her voice controlled. "It was just a moment. We're both tired. The event was stressful." "It wasn't just a moment," Edward interrupted, taking a step toward her. "At least not for me." Janay turned slowly to face him. There was vulnerability in her eyes, mixed with something that looked like hope and fear in equal measure. "What are you saying, Edward?" He took another step, closing the distance between them. "I'm saying that something is happening here. Something I didn't plan, that I probably shouldn't be feeling, but that I can't deny anymore." Janay closed her eyes for an instant, as if absorbing the impact of those words. "You're my employer," she said almost in a whisper. "I take care of your daughter." "This is complicated." "I know," he agreed. "But life is rarely simple, is it? What I feel when I'm with you, when I see you with Sophia." He couldn't finish the sentence. Instead, he took the last step that separated them and, slowly, as if giving her every chance to retreat, he leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was soft at first, almost hesitant, but it quickly deepened as Janay responded, her arms wrapping around Edward's neck. There was desire there, but also something deeper, a connection that transcended the physical. When they separated, they were both breathless. Edward rested his forehead against hers, keeping her close. "I didn't want this to happen," Janay confessed, her voice trembling. "Not like this. There are so many complications." "I know," Edward repeated, "but I also know I don't want to pretend it doesn't exist. That I don't feel what I feel." Before Janay could answer, a sound from the hallway made them pull apart quickly. Sophia was standing there, holding her teddy bear, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Daddy?" "Jana," she called in a sleepy voice. "You're back." Edward and Janay exchanged a quick look, a silent promise to continue this conversation later, and then turned to Sophia with smiles that tried to hide the emotional turmoil they were feeling. "Yes, Princess, we're back," Edward said, approaching to pick her up. "But it's late, you should be in bed." "I want Jana to take me," Sophia requested, reaching her arms out to the nanny. Edward felt a pang of jealousy, but he handed her to Janay, who took her into her arms naturally. "Just one more story, please," Sophia begged, nestling into Janay's neck. "Just a very short one, then," Janay relented, casting one last look at Edward before carrying the girl back to her room. Edward was left alone in the living room, trying to process what had just happened. The kiss, the confession, Sophia's timely interruption. Part of him felt guilty, as if he were betraying Marcia's memory. Another part, however, felt alive for the first time in 2 years, as if he were finally emerging from a long period, submerged in the dark waters of grief. He walked slowly to his room, knowing he wouldn't be able to sleep. His mind was filled with unanswered questions. What did that kiss mean for the future? How would this affect Sophia? What would people say? And most importantly, what did Janay really feel? In Sophia's room, Janay finished telling a story about a princess who lived in the clouds. The girl was almost asleep again. "Jana?" Sophia murmured, fighting sleep. "Yes, my love." "Do you like my daddy?" The question caught Janay by surprise. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Your daddy is a very good man, Sophia. He loves you very much. But do you like him? Like Mommy liked him?" A tear escaped from the corner of Janay's eye, falling silently onto Sophia's pillow. "It's complicated, sweetie," she finally replied. "Now sleep, it's very late." Sophia closed her eyes, satisfied with the answer, or simply overcome by sleep. Janay remained there, sitting on the edge of the bed for a few more minutes, watching the child who had captured her heart so unexpectedly. She thought of Tiana, so far away from her for so many months. She thought of Edward, of the kiss they had shared, of the confusion she felt. When she finally left Sophia's room, she found the hallway empty. The door to Edward's room was closed, as it should be. Janay walked slowly to her own room, closed the door, and only then allowed the tears to come freely. That night, both Edward and Janay lay awake late, separated only by a wall, but connected by feelings that neither had planned or foreseen. Feelings that, like a river changing its course after a storm, were redrawing the emotional map of that beachfront apartment in Miami. The next morning arrived with the intense brightness of the Miami sun flooding the apartment. Edward woke up. After a few hours of restless sleep, his mind still occupied with the events of the previous night. When he entered the kitchen, Janne was already there preparing Sophia's breakfast. She was wearing simple jeans and a light blue blouse, her hair tied back in a casual ponytail. She seemed lost in thought as she cut fruit with precision. "Good morning," Edward said, breaking the silence. Janne turned, visibly startled. There was a shadow of hesitation in her eyes, as if she didn't know exactly how to act after the kiss they had shared. "Good morning, Edward," she replied, opting to use his first name without the Mr. that had always accompanied it before. A small but significant detail that did not go unnoticed by him. "Is Sophia still sleeping?" he asked, approaching to get a mug from the cabinet, deliberately standing closer than necessary. Yes, it was an eventful night for her too. There was a pause filled with unresolved tension. Edward could smell Janne's soft perfume, a discreet floral scent he was beginning to associate with the feeling of home. "About last night," he began. "We don't have to talk about it now," Janne interrupted, turning her attention back to the fruit. Sophia could wake up at any moment. Edward respected her reluctance, but felt a twinge of disappointment. Part of him had hoped the morning light would bring more clarity, not more doubt. "All right," he agreed, pouring himself some coffee. "But we'll have to talk at some point." Janne just nodded without turning around. The weekend passed in a curious dance of approaches and withdrawals. Edward made a point of creating moments to be alone with Janne, who in turn found excuses to avoid these situations. Sophia, oblivious to the tension between the adults, was more demanding than usual, insisting that the three of them do everything together, from watching cartoons on television to going to the mall. It was only on Sunday night, with Sophia finally asleep after an exhausting day at the park, that Edward managed to corner Janne on the balcony. She was watering the plants, another habit she had brought to the apartment, making it more alive and welcoming. "You've been avoiding me," he said, without beating around the bush. Janne sighed, placing the watering can on the small balcony table. "I've been thinking, Edward. What happened? It was a mistake." "That's not what it seemed like when you kissed me back," he countered, moving closer. "I didn't say I didn't feel anything," she clarified, facing him directly for the first time that weekend. "I said it was a mistake." "Why?" "Because I work for you. Because your daughter is already emotionally attached to me, in a way that could be damaging if things go wrong between us. Because I have my own daughter to think about, my own plans." Edward received each argument like a small blow, recognizing the truth behind them. "And what if it works out?" he asked, further closing the space between them. "Have you thought about that possibility?" Janne looked away toward the sea stretching into the distance. The city lights reflected on the dark water. "People like us rarely end up together, Edward. People like us. A successful businessman, heir to a fortune, and a teacher from a small town in Florida working as a nanny. You don't have to be a genius to see how this ends." The bitterness in her voice surprised him. There was pain there, perhaps from past experiences he knew nothing about. "You don't know me as well as you think, Janne," he said softly. "I'm not the stereotype you imagine." "It's not about you specifically," she explained, turning to face him again. "It's about the world we live in. You saw how people looked at me last night, how your ex-girlfriend treated me, how that lady, your partner's wife, could barely hide her contempt. And since when do you care what other people think? Since it could affect my daughter." The answer came out stronger than she intended. Janne took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "Tiana was bullied at school when they found out I had come to work as a nanny in Miami. Teenagers can be cruel. What if things don't work out between us? What if people start talking? How would that affect her? And Sophia?" Edward didn't have an immediate answer. Her concern was legitimate, and he felt selfish for not having considered all these layers. "I understand your concerns," he said finally, "but we can't let the fear of what might happen stop us from trying." "It's not that simple, Edward." "It never is," he agreed, taking her hands in his. "But what I feel for you, what has started to happen between us, is not something I want to dismiss without at least trying to understand it." Janne looked at their joined hands, a gesture so simple yet so significant. "I need time," she said finally, "to think, to understand what I'm feeling." "All the time you need," Edward promised, bringing her hands to his lips and kissing them gently. "Just don't pull away." Before they could continue the conversation, Janne's phone rang. She moved away to answer, and Edward immediately noticed from the change in her expression that something was wrong. "What do you mean she fainted?" Janae's voice trembled slightly. "Is she at the hospital now?" "How long?" "Sir, I understand. Yes, I'll try to sort it out as soon as I can. Tell her I'm on my way." When she hung up, her face had lost its color. "What's wrong?" Edward asked, concerned. "Tiana." Janae seemed to be struggling to maintain her composure. "She fainted at work. She has severe anemia. My mother took her to the hospital, but the tests aren't good. She needs more specialized treatment." "Work?" Edward frowned. "How old is your daughter?" 15. "She started working part-time at a diner to help with expenses, even though I send money every month." Guilt was written all over Janae's face. Edward could see how she blamed herself for being far from her daughter, for not realizing the situation was so serious. "You need to go to Apalachicola," he said decisively. "I can't just drop everything." "You, Sophia, of course you can. She's your daughter." Janae bit her lower lip, visibly torn. "I could just go for a few days, check on the situation, and come back. I don't want to leave Sophia." Or Edward hesitated, then took the plunge. "Or you could bring Tiana here." The suggestion took Janae by surprise. "What do you mean?" "Miami has excellent hospitals. I can help you get the best specialists. Tiana could stay here with you, get the right treatment. When she's better, she could even go to school here." Janae stared at him with a complex expression, somewhere between gratitude and suspicion. "Why would you do that?" "Because I care about you," he answered simply, "and because I understand what it's like to worry about a child." The tears Janae had been holding back finally escaped. Edward hugged her, feeling her body tremble slightly as she cried. "Thank you," she murmured against his chest. "But I can't accept." "Why not?" "I already owe you so much. I don't want to increase this debt." Edward pulled back a little to look her in the eyes. "It's not a debt, Janae. It's an investment in our future, in whatever is growing between us." She shook her head, wiping away tears with the back of her hands. "I can't mix things up like that. If I accept your help for Tiana and then decide I can't return your feelings, where would that leave us?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Edward understood what she meant. She didn't want to feel obligated to reciprocate his feelings out of gratitude. "All right," he conceded, respecting her position. "But at least let me buy your plane tickets to go to Apalachicola tomorrow. Consider it an advance on your salary." Janae hesitated but eventually agreed. "I just need to talk to Sophia. Explain that I'll be gone for a few days." "We can do it together," Edward offered, "tomorrow morning before you leave." That night, while Janae packed a small bag for the trip, Edward made a few calls. First to Fernanda, explaining that he would need to work from home for a few days, then to a doctor friend, asking for referrals for pediatric hematology specialists in Apalachicola. Lastly, without Janae's knowledge, to an airline, booking 3 return tickets to Miami. The next morning, the conversation with Sophia was harder than they expected. The girl, upon understanding that Janae was leaving, even if for a short time, fell into a state of anxiety that reminded Edward of the worst moments after Marcia's death. "You're coming back, right, Jana?" Sophia asked, clinging to Janae's legs as she finished packing her bag. "Promise?" "Of course I'm coming back, my love," Janae assured her, crouching down to be at the girl's eye level. "So I'm just going to see Tiana, help her get better, and I'll be back soon. But what if you like staying with her more than with me?" The question, delivered with the cutting sincerity typical of children, hit Janae like a physical blow. Edward, watching the scene from the bedroom doorway, felt his heart ache. "Sophia, our hearts are very big, you know," Janae explained, holding the girl's little hands. "There's room to love many people at the same time. I love Tiana, who is my daughter, but I also love you in a very special way." "You really love me?" Sophia's eyes widened. "Very much," Janae confirmed, hugging her. "And I'll be back very soon." Edward drove them to the airport, with Sophia insisting on coming along to say a proper goodbye. On the way, the girl was unusually quiet, looking out the window with a thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking about, Princess?" Edward asked. "If Tiana is Jana's daughter and Jana takes care of me, like a mom—" Sophia paused, organizing her thoughts. "Would Tiana be like my sister?" The question took the adults by surprise. Edward and Janae exchanged a quick look in the rearview mirror. It's complicated, Sophia, Edward replied, trying to buy time. But Jana is like your girlfriend now, right? Sophia insisted. I saw you kissing that night. Edward almost lost control of the car. Janae audibly gasped in the back seat, where she was sitting next to Sophia. Sophia! Janae exclaimed, recovering from the shock. Weren't you sleeping? I woke up to go potty, and I saw you in the living room, Sophia explained, with the casualness of someone commenting on the weather. It was just like when Mommy and Daddy used to kiss. Does that mean you're going to be my mom now? The silence that followed was heavy. Edward didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to say yes if we're lucky, but he knew it would be premature, perhaps even irresponsible, to create that expectation. Sophia, sweetie, Janae began, choosing her words with care, your dad and I are getting to know each other better. Like special friends. But no one will ever replace your mom. She will always be your mom, even if she's in heaven. I know that, Sophia replied, surprising them again with her maturity. But can't I have two moms? One in heaven and one here. Edward felt his eyes burn with unshed tears. The simplicity of a child could sometimes express truths that adults overcomplicated. We can talk more about this when I get back, okay? Janae proposed, visibly emotional. At the airport, the farewell was brief but intense. Sophia hugged Janae as if she would never see her again. And Edward had to practically pry her from the nanny's arms so she could board. Call me as soon as you land, he asked, after Sophia got distracted by a store window. And keep me updated on Tiana. Thank you for understanding, for your support, Janae said with sincerity. It's going to be hard being away from you two, even for a little while. Edward wanted to kiss her right there in the middle of the airport terminal, but he restrained himself. Instead, he squeezed her hand tightly, a gesture that said much more than words could express. I hope Tiana gets better soon, he said, and that you both come back safely. Returning home with Sophia, Edward realized how strangely empty the apartment felt without Janae's presence. It was as if an essential piece of the family machinery had been removed, leaving everything to run more slowly and clumsily. Sophia was restless, alternating between moments of sadness and sudden bursts of energy. Edward, trying to distract her, suggested they make the dinner that Janae had left semi-prepared in the refrigerator. Did Jana leave instructions? Sophia asked. As Edward looked confused at the bowls of separated ingredients. I think so, he replied, finding a piece of paper with Janae's neat handwriting, explaining step by step how to finish the dish. Let's try to follow the script. The cooking activity worked as a temporary distraction, but at bedtime Sophia felt Janae's absence intensely again. I want Jana to tell me a story, she whimpered, refusing to lie down. Jana isn't here, Princess. Remember she went to see Tiana? Edward explained, trying to remain patient. But I can tell you a story. It's not the same, Sophia insisted, crossing her arms. You don't know how to do the different voices like she does. Edward felt a pang of jealousy, but took a deep breath. I can try, he offered. How about you teach me how Jana does it? The suggestion worked. Sophia took on the role of instructor, seriously explaining how Janae modulated her voice for each character, how she made specific gestures, how she knew exactly when to pause for dramatic effect. Slowly the girl relaxed and finally fell asleep. Alone in the living room, Edward called Janae, who had already arrived in Apalachicola and was at the hospital with Tiana. How is she? He asked after the initial greetings. Not very well, Janae's voice trembled slightly. The doctors say the anemia is more severe than we initially thought. She's going to need transfusions and prolonged treatment. I'm so sorry, Jani. Is there anything I can do to help? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Actually, I've been thinking about your offer, about bringing Tiana to Miami. Edward felt a wave of hope. The offer still stands. I wouldn't be comfortable accepting financial help from you, Edward. I wouldn't feel right about it. But if you know doctors who could see her for a fair price, leave it with me, he promised, already thinking of who he could contact. When are you planning to come back? I don't know yet. Maybe in 3 or 4 days, depending on her stabilization. Sophia misses you a lot, Edward commented, allowing himself a moment of vulnerability. I do too. I miss you guys too, Janae's voice softened. It's strange, isn't it? How in such a short time... She didn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. Edward knew exactly what she meant, how in such a short time they had become so important to each other. The days that followed were a challenge for Edward. He tried to balance remote work with caring for Sophia, who alternated between periods of cooperation and moments of tantrums. He understood in practice how much Janae had done for them, how her presence smoothed over all aspects of domestic life. On the third day, he received a call from Janae with news. Tiana was better, stabilized, and the doctors had authorized her transfer to Miami. As long as she continued her treatment there. "I'm thinking of coming back tomorrow," Janae said, "with Tiana and my mom. Your mom is coming too." Edward hadn't expected that, just to help with the trip. "Tiana is still weak. Mrs. Josephine will go back to Apalachicola the next day." "I see. Well, I'll be happy to pick you all up at the airport." Edward, Janae's voice hesitated. "Are you sure about this? About having us like this? Tiana will need a place to stay, and I thought—" "The guest room is yours, and we can set up the office for Tiana," he interrupted without hesitation. "It's a temporary solution until we find something better." "Something better? A bigger apartment, maybe?" "The building next door has 4-bedroom units." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Edward realized he might be getting ahead of himself, planning a future that was still uncertain. One step at a time, right? He corrected himself quickly. "Let's focus on Tiana's recovery first." "Yes, that's better," Janae agreed, seeming relieved. "Thank you, Edward, for everything." When he hung up, Edward felt a wave of anxiety and expectation. The idea of having Tiana living there, forming a kind of extended family with him, Sophia and Janae, was both frightening and exciting. There were many variables, many possible obstacles, but there was also a sense that everything was falling into place, like pieces of a puzzle that was only now beginning to make sense. The night before Janae and Tiana's arrival, Edward told Sophia the news. The girl's reaction was one of pure enthusiasm. "Tiana is going to live with us?" she asked, bouncing around the living room. "I've always wanted a big sister." "Temporarily, Princess," Edward clarified, trying to manage expectations. "Until she gets better. And she's not exactly your sister. She's Jana's daughter, and Jana is almost your girlfriend. So she's almost my sister," Sophia calculated. With a logic that, while simplistic, wasn't entirely wrong, Edward smiled, unable to argue with this childish emotional math. "The important thing is that Tiana is sick, and we need to help her recover. Can you be a good friend to her?" "I'll be her best friend," Sophia promised, already making plans. "I can show her all my toys and my books, and we can watch Frozen together." Edward doubted a 15-year-old would share the same enthusiasm for dolls and children's movies, but he kept that thought to himself. The important thing was that Sophia was excited, not apprehensive. The apartment was prepared to receive the new residents. Edward quickly transformed his office into a makeshift room for Tiana, with a comfortable folding bed and a small desk. Sophia insisted on decorating the space with some of her drawings to make it more cheerful for Tiana. The next day, when they finally went to the airport, Sophia could barely contain her excitement. She jumped and twirled through the terminal, asking every 2 minutes if the plane had landed yet. "Calm down, Princess, they'll be here soon," Edward said, checking the arrivals board one more time. "And remember, Tiana is weak. We can't tire her out too much today." "I'll be super careful," Sophia promised seriously, like a nurse. When they finally saw Janae coming out of the arrivals gate, Sophia ran towards her, ignoring her father's calls to slow down. Janae crouched just in time to receive the girl's tight hug. "Yana! Yana! I missed you so much," Sophia exclaimed, clinging to Janae's neck. "I missed you too, my love," Janae replied, visibly emotional. These days away felt like weeks. Edward approached more slowly, noticing just behind Janae a woman of about 60, with grey hair in a bun and a thin teenager, with skin as dark as her mother's, but with more angular features. Tiana was pale, leaning on a makeshift cane, but her eyes, identical to Janae's, observed everything with curiosity and a certain mistrust. "You must be Mrs. Josephine and Tiana," Edward greeted, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." The woman shook his hand with surprising firmness. "The pleasure is ours, Mr. Tavares," she replied, with the same southern accent as Janae, but even more pronounced. "Janae has told me a lot about you." "Just Edward, please," he asked, feeling uncomfortable with the formality. He then turned to the teenager. "And you must be Tiana. Your mother talks a lot about you." Tiana watched him with a cautious expression, accepting his handshake with a fragile hand but a firm grip. "Thank you for having us in your home," she said with a politeness that seemed rehearsed. "I hope I won't be too much of a bother." Before Edward could respond, Sophia escaped from Janae's arms and approached Tiana. "Hi, I'm Sophia. You're much prettier than in the pictures. I prepared a special room for you at home with drawings and everything." Sophia's spontaneity broke some of the initial tension. Tiana smiled slightly, looking at the child with curiosity. "Thank you, Sophia. I can't wait to see it." During the drive to the apartment, Sophia talked non-stop, updating Janae on everything that had happened in the 4 days of her absence. Edward, driving, watched in the rearview mirror the interactions between Tiana and Mrs. Josephine, who seemed simultaneously impressed and intimidated by the luxurious neighborhood, the comfortable car, the life Janae was leading in Miami. At the apartment, Sophia made a point of showing Tiana every room, saving the surprise for last, the room prepared especially for her. Edward noticed that the teenager was getting paler with the extended tour. "Sophia, I think Tiana needs to rest now," Janae intervened, noticing the same thing. "The trip was tiring. But I haven't shown her my seashell collection yet," Sophia protested. "You can show her later," Janae promised. "Right now, Tiana needs to lie down for a bit." While Janae helped her daughter get settled, Mrs. Josephine stayed in the kitchen with Edward, observing the apartment with watchful eyes. "You have a very beautiful home," she commented finally. "And your daughter is a sweet child." "Thank you, Mrs. Josephine," Edward replied, preparing coffee for the woman. "Sophia is very fond of Janae, I noticed. And Janae of her too." There was something in the woman's tone, a careful evaluation, that made Edward feel as if he were being examined under a microscope. "Janae has been essential for us," he said sincerely. "I don't know what we would do without her." Mrs. Josephine nodded slowly, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "You like my daughter?" It wasn't a question, but a statement. Edward hesitated for only a second. "Yes, I like her very much. She's a good woman. Hard-working, honest, dedicated. Raised Tiana practically on her own, after that irresponsible father of hers disappeared into thin air." "I know she's exceptional," Edward agreed. Mrs. Josephine took a sip of her coffee, evaluating him over the rim of the cup. "The world isn't easy for people like us, Mr. Tavares. A woman like Janae, with our skin color, coming from where we come from. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Edward nodded slowly, understanding the subtext. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Josephine, and I can assure you that my feelings for your daughter are sincere. It's not about—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "An adventure with the nanny?" the woman completed bluntly. "That's good to know, because Janae has suffered enough in her life, and now with Tiana sick, she's even more vulnerable. I will do everything in my power to help Tiana," Edward promised. "I've already scheduled appointments with the best specialists in Miami." Mrs. Josephine studied him for a few more moments, then surprisingly smiled. "You seem to be a decent man, Edward," she said, dropping the Mr. and Sir all at once. "I hope you are, for the sake of my daughter and my granddaughter." Before Edward could respond, Janae returned to the kitchen. "Tiana is resting. Sophia has finally agreed to leave her alone for a few hours," she reported, looking exhausted. "What were you two talking about?" "Just getting to know your boss better," Mrs. Josephine replied with a complicit look at Edward. "It's important to know who my daughter is working for, isn't it?" Janae cast a suspicious glance between the two, clearly sensing that the conversation had been deeper than her mother was suggesting. That night, after Sophia had fallen asleep and Tiana was settled in her makeshift room, Mrs. Josephine, Janae, and Edward sat in the living room to discuss the next steps. "The doctors said the treatment could take months," Janae explained. "Tiana will need regular transfusions, supplements, constant monitoring. The important thing is that she gets well," Edward said, "however long it takes." "I can't accept abusing your hospitality so much, Edward," Janae protested. "Maybe I should look for a small apartment for us." "With what money, my dear?" Mrs. Josephine intervened, ever practical. "Renting in Miami isn't cheap, especially in a neighborhood with good hospitals nearby. Besides, who would take care of Tiana while you work?" Edward added. "Here at least I can help when I'm home." Janae seemed torn, her face reflecting the internal conflict between accepting the help she needed and maintaining her independence. "Maybe I should go back to Apalachicola with both of them," she murmured. "Start over there. And Sophia?" Edward asked, knowing it was a low blow but a necessary one. "How would she manage without you?" The mention of Sophia made Janny visibly flinch. Mrs. Josephine watched her daughter with an understanding gaze. "Janty, my child, sometimes we have to accept help," the older woman said gently. "It's not weakness, it's wisdom." "Your mother is right," Edward supported. "Besides, it's not a decision that needs to be made right now. Let's focus on Tiana's treatment first. See how she adjusts here." Janae nodded, too tired to argue. When Mrs. Josephine retired to the guest room, which she would share with Janae that night, Edward found himself alone with Janae for the first time since her return. "I missed you," he confessed, moving closer on the sofa. "More than I expected." Janae smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "I missed you too. And Sophia. It seems you two have become essential to me." The admission, made with simplicity, touched Edward deeply. He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I'm not going to pressure you, Janae. I know that now, with Tiana sick, you have other priorities. I just want you to know that I'm here, for whatever you need." "Thank you," she said, squeezing his hand back. "For everything. For welcoming my family, for helping with Tiana, for understanding." Edward leaned in and kissed her softly. It was a brief, almost chaste kiss, but loaded with unspoken promises. "Go get some rest," he suggested as they separated. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As he watched Janae walk towards the room, Edward felt a strange mix of apprehension and hope. The apartment that once housed only him and Sophia now welcomed 3 women who, each in their own way, were beginning to transform his life. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he saw it with possibilities that went beyond the solitary routine he had built for himself after losing Marcia. That night, as Miami slept under the sea breeze, 4 lives that had intertwined by chance began to weave a new pattern together, redefining the meaning of family beyond the ties of blood or social conventions. 2 weeks had passed since Tiana's arrival and the brief stay of Mrs. Josephine, who had returned to Apalachicola after ensuring her granddaughter was well settled and receiving the necessary care. In that short period, the dynamic of the South Beach apartment had completely transformed. What was once a silent home, marked by absences, now pulsed with renewed energy, though not without its challenges. Tiana, initially shy and reserved, was beginning to adapt to her new reality. Her makeshift room in Edward's former office had become a small sanctuary, decorated with photographs of Apalachicola and a few posters that Sophia had insisted on buying. For her, one from the Korean series The Teenager obsessively watched on her phone, and another of a pop band that Sophia mistakenly believed Tiana adored. Medical appointments were frequent, and the results showed a gradual, albeit slow, improvement. The anemia, caused by a combination of poor diet, stress and genetic predisposition, would respond well to treatment, according to the specialists, but it would require months of rigorous monitoring. Sophia had adopted Tiana as the big sister she never had. She followed the teenager around the house, imitating her gestures, asking to try her lip gloss, pestering her with incessant questions about Florida, about school, about what it's like to be big. Surprisingly, Tiana showed unexpected patience with the little one, perhaps because Sophia's sincere admiration fueled her teenage ego, which had been weakened by illness. One particularly sunny afternoon, Edward arrived home early from work and found a scene that made him stop at the entrance to the living room. Tiana, sitting on the sofa with a math textbook, was patiently explaining an operation to Sophia, who was watching her with absolute concentration. Janae in the kitchen was preparing a snack while humming softly. The domesticity of the scene hit him with unexpected force. "Look, Daddy's home," Sophia announced, being the first to notice him. "Tiana is teaching me advanced math." "I see," Edward smiled, approaching. "Advanced math, huh?" "Just basic multiplication," Tiana corrected with a half-smile. She was shy around him, still adjusting to the idea of living in a stranger's house. "Sophia is very smart. She learns quickly. Just like her mom," Jenny commented, entering the living room with a tray of sandwiches. Then, realizing what she had said, She quickly corrected herself. I mean, she has a knack for it like Marcia did. You mentioned once she was an engineer, right? Edward nodded, feeling the momentary weight of his late wife's name, but without the sharp pain that used to accompany it. Yes, Marcia was brilliant with numbers, he confirmed. Sophia got that from her. And what did I get from you, Daddy? Sophia asked, curious. Edward thought for a moment. The stubbornness, for sure, he replied, making everyone laugh. And maybe a taste for pistachio ice cream. Yuck, Sophia protested. I hate pistachio. I like chocolate, just like Jana. The casual comment associating her preferences with Janaise and no longer with her biological parents went unnoticed by Sophia, but not by the adults. Tiana cast a quick glance at her mother, which Edward couldn't quite interpret. That night, after Sophia and Tiana were asleep, Edward found Janae on the balcony, contemplating the sea illuminated only by the reflection of the city lights. It had become their habit, these nightly meetings, where they talked about the day, about the girls, about the small adjustments needed to accommodate 4 people in a space originally designed for 3. What are you thinking about? He asked, handing her a glass of wine. Janae accepted the drink, taking a small sip before answering. About how everything changed so quickly. About how life takes unexpected turns. For the better, I hope, Edward commented, leaning on the balcony railing beside her. In many ways, yes, she agreed. Tiana is getting better, having access to doctors we could never get in Apalachicola. Sophia is flourishing. You're more present, more connected with her. And you? He asked, turning to observe her profile. How do you feel? Janae took a deep breath, her eyes still fixed on the marine horizon. Divided, she admitted finally. Between gratitude and guilt. Between what I desire and what I fear. Between what we are building here and the fear that it's temporary. Edward took her free hand, intertwining their fingers. It doesn't have to be temporary, he said softly. If we don't want it to be. Janae finally turned to face him. Edward, we need to be realistic. What we have here, it's complicated. You're a successful businessman, owner of one of the largest digital security companies in the Southeast. I'm an elementary school teacher from a small town in Florida, working as a nanny. Our realities are very different. They were different, he corrected. Now we're building a new reality, together. For how long? The question came loaded with insecurity. Until when will this make sense to you? Until when will society, your friends, your colleagues accept it? Edward sighed, understanding her concerns. Janae, I spent 2 years living to please others. Keeping up appearances, following the script they expected of me. The widower dedicated to his work. Raising his daughter as best he could, eventually moving on with someone from his circle. He made air quotes as he pronounced the last words. Do you know what that got me? Loneliness. An unhappy daughter. A house empty of affection. He moved closer, holding Janae's face in both hands. Then you arrived with your authenticity, your strength, your capacity to love. And you transformed everything. You made Sophia smile again. You made me want to come home. You filled the empty spaces I didn't even know existed. How could I give that up? Because of what others think. Janae's eyes shone with unshed tears. I'm afraid of not being enough, she confessed in a whisper. That you'll get tired of me. That Sophia will need more than I can give. That I'll fail Tiana by being divided. You are more than enough, he assured her, wiping away a tear that escaped from the corner of her eye. And you're not alone in this. We're building this together, one day at a time. Edward leaned in and kissed her softly, a kiss that sealed an implicit promise. When they pulled away, Janae smiled, a smile still shy but more confident. One day at a time then, she agreed. Starting tomorrow. The school where Tiana is taking the entrance exam asked for my presence. Could you take Sophia to school? Of course, he replied, stroking her face. And we can have lunch together afterward. I have a meeting late in the afternoon, but my morning is free. The conversation drifted to domestic matters, planning the week, small daily decisions. To an outside observer, it might have seemed like a banal conversation between an ordinary couple. But for Edward and Janae, it represented something profound. The beginning of building a shared routine, of decisions made together, of a future imagined side by side. The next morning, as Edward was taking Sophia to school, the first incident that would shake the fragile harmony they had been building occurred. On his way back, he decided to stop at a flower shop to buy a bouquet for Janae, a simple romantic gesture he had wanted to make for days. He chose yellow lilies, which he had noticed were her favorite from the flowers she occasionally bought to decorate the house. Upon arriving at the apartment, he found Tiana alone in the living room, watching a documentary on television. "Good morning, Tiana," he greeted, hiding the flowers behind his back. "Has your mom left for the school already?" The teenager nodded, but her expression was serious, almost tense. "She left half an hour ago," she replied, looking away from the documentary to face him. "Can I ask you something, Edward?" "Of course," he replied, sitting in the armchair opposite the sofa where Tiana was. He discreetly placed the bouquet beside him, out of sight. "What are your intentions with my mother?" The question, delivered with the blunt frankness typical of teenagers, caught Edward by surprise. Tiana watched him intently, her eyes so similar to Janae's, fixed on him with a maturity beyond her 15 years. Well, Edward cleared his throat, trying to organize his thoughts. "I care about your mother very much, Tiana. I have deep feelings for her." "Feelings?" the teenager repeated with a skeptical tone. "What kind of feelings? The I want her to keep being my daughter's nanny while we have an affair kind? Or the I want to build something serious with her kind?" Edward felt his face heat up, taken aback by the rawness of the question. But he understood the concern behind it. Tiana was protecting her mother, making sure she wouldn't just be a passing fling. "The serious kind," he answered with sincerity. "The kind that makes you imagine a future together. Getting to know your mother, and you and Sophia, this dynamic we've created. It's changed my perspective on a lot of things." Tiana studied him for a few more moments, as if assessing the truthfulness of his words. "My mom has been through a lot, you know," she said finally. "My dad left her when he found out she was pregnant. Then there were other guys, always promising the world, always disappearing when things got tough." Edward felt a pang of irrational jealousy at the thought of other men in Janae's life, but quickly suppressed the feeling, focusing on what really mattered. "I'm not those men, Tiana," he assured her, leaning forward. "I can't promise we'll never face difficulties, but I can promise I won't disappear when they arise." The teenager nodded slowly, seeming to consider his words. Then unexpectedly she smiled. "Are the flowers for her?" she asked, pointing to the bouquet partially visible beside the armchair. "They are," Edward admitted, feeling suddenly shy, like a teenager in love. "Yellow lilies. She likes them." "I know," Tiana's smile widened. "They've been her favorite since I was little. My grandmother always said Mum was like a lily, strong and delicate at the same time." "A perfect description," Edward agreed, feeling more relaxed with the change of tone in the conversation. "Your mother is incredible, Tiana. I hope you know how much." "I do," the seriousness returned to the teenager's eyes. "That's why I'm having this conversation with you. Because she deserves someone who truly sees her, not as the nanny or the teacher or any other label, but as Janae." Edward felt a lump in his throat at the emotional maturity of this young woman. "I promise that's how I see her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And if it's up to me, that's how everyone will see her." Before the conversation could continue, the intercom buzzed. Edward answered, surprised to hear the doorman's voice announcing the unexpected visit of Richard Mendoza, his partner, and Veronica, his wife. The couple they had met at the cocktail party, where Veronica had treated Janae with ill-disguised disdain. "Tell them I'm coming down," he replied, feeling a sudden apprehension. Richard rarely visited him at home, preferring to handle business matters at the office. "Tiana, I have to see some people. Will you be okay alone for a while?" "Sure," she replied, turning her attention back to the documentary. "Don't worry about me." Edward left the bouquet on the kitchen table and went down quickly to the lobby where Richard and Veronica were waiting. She was wearing an expensive business suit, ostentatious jewelry and flawless makeup. He, always formal, wore his traditional grey suit. "Edward, my dear fellow," Richard greeted with excessive joviality. "I hope we're not disturbing you." Veronica insisted we drop by for a quick coffee. The mention of coffee indicated they expected to be invited up, something Edward preferred to avoid. He didn't want to expose Tiana to the couple's potentially unpleasant presence. "Actually, I'm just on my way out for a meeting," he lied, hoping to discourage them. "Can we talk at the office later?" "Oh, but it will be so quick," Veronica insisted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We just wanted to see how Sophia is doing." "It's been so long." From the artificial tone, Edward suspected the visit had other motives. He considered refusing again, but decided it would be better to get whatever had brought the couple to his home on a Monday morning over with. "All right, come on up. But Sophia's at school. It's just a quick visit, right?" In the elevator, Richard maintained a superficial conversation about the financial market, while Veronica watched him with an enigmatic smile that made him uncomfortable. As they entered the apartment, Edward saw Veronica's eyes scan the room, as if looking for someone or something. "What a charming apartment," she commented with false admiration. "Always so well kept. Your nanny must be very efficient." The tone with which she pronounced nanny made it clear what she thought of the situation. Edward felt his irritation grow but maintained his composure. "Janny is exceptional, yes," he replied, deliberately using her first name. "But she's not home right now. She went to handle matters related to her daughter's school." "Her daughter?" Veronica raised her perfectly shaped eyebrows. "I didn't know she had a daughter." At that moment, Tiana appeared in the hallway, drawn by the voices. She was wearing a baggy sweatshirt and pajama pants, the typical look of a convalescing teenager. "Edward, do I need any medicine?" she asked, seeming uncomfortable with the presence of strangers. The look that Veronica and Richard exchanged did not go unnoticed. It was a mixture of surprise and something more malicious. "Living here?" Veronica repeated, with a smile that didn't hide her disapproval. "How generous of you, Edward." "It's the least I can do," he replied, unintimidated. "Tiana needed specialized treatment, and Miami has resources that Apalachicola doesn't offer." "No, Tiana, it's all right," he replied, moving closer. "These are Richard and Veronica Mendoza, partners at my company. This is Tiana, Janay's daughter. She's living with us temporarily while she undergoes medical treatment." Richard cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Well, we don't want to disturb you. We just stopped by to invite you and Sophia to our grandson's birthday party next weekend." Edward realized it was an improvised excuse. The real reason for the visit had been satisfied, confirming the rumors about his relationship with Janay and the presence of her daughter in his home. "We appreciate the invitation," he replied politely. "I'll see if we're available." After a few minutes of forced conversation, the couple finally left. The moment the door closed behind them, Tiana looked at Edward with a worried expression. "They didn't like seeing me here, did they?" Edward hesitated, not wanting to burden the teenager with the complexities of the social dynamics at play. "They're traditional people," he replied diplomatically. "They have a limited view of how families can be organized." "You mean they're prejudiced," Tiana translated with teenage frankness. "They don't like the idea of you getting involved with someone like my mum." "That's their problem, not ours," Edward assured her, lightly touching the girl's shoulder. "Don't worry about it." But the worry was there, and Edward knew the visit was just the beginning. The rumors about his relationship with Janay and Tiana's presence in his home were surely already circulating in his social and professional circles. When Janay returned from the school, bringing the news that Tiana had been accepted and could start classes as soon as her health stabilized, Edward decided not to mention Richard and Veronica's visit. He didn't want to tarnish the happiness of that moment with worries about what others thought. He handed her the bouquet of yellow lilies, earning a spontaneous kiss that made him momentarily forget all his concerns. They had lunch together, celebrating the good news, and for a few hours, the outside world seemed not to exist. But reality had a way of imposing itself, and it happened the next morning when Edward arrived at the office and found Fernanda waiting for him with a worried expression. "You need to see this," she said, handing him a tablet with a social media page open. It was the profile of a gossip columnist, known for her work in a local paper, who now maintained a blog about Miami's high society. The most recent post featured a photo of Edward and Janay at the mall taken without their knowledge, with the sensationalist headline, "Widowed businessman finds solace in the nanny's arms, the new cliché of the Miami elite." The text that followed was even more malicious, insinuating that Janay had ensnared Edward, mentioning Tiana's presence in the apartment, and raising questions about how far the young woman from Florida would go to secure a life of luxury for herself and her daughter. Edward felt the blood boil in his veins. Who the hell, he began, unable to complete the sentence from sheer anger. Richard and Veronica were at your house yesterday, weren't they? Fernanda asked, crossing her arms. I bet the information leaked through them. This is defamation, Edward muttered, still reading the infamous text. I can sue. And give the matter more visibility, Fernanda questioned sensibly. Look, Edward, you knew something. Like this could happen when you decided to get involved with Janae. People like Veronica can't stand to see someone from outside their circle entering their world. Edward dropped the tablet on the table, running his hands over his face in frustration. This is going to hit Janae and Tiana and possibly Sophia when she goes back to school. Then you need to decide how to handle it, Fernanda replied, sitting in front of him. What's more important to you? The question hung in the air, demanding an answer that deep down Edward already knew. Janae and the girls, he said without hesitation. They are my priority now. Then act accordingly, Fernanda advised, standing up, and quickly before this story gets even bigger. That same afternoon, returning home earlier than usual, Edward found Janae in the living room, her face pale and her eyes red. Sophia was in the room with Tiana, both oblivious to the tension hanging between the adults. You saw. It wasn't a question. Janae nodded, showing him her phone with the same post Fernanda had shown him that morning. A mum from Sophia's school sent it to me, she explained, her voice choked with emotion. She said she was worried about the girls' well-being, as if I were a threat. Edward moved closer, pulling her into a hug that she initially resisted but then surrendered to. I'm so sorry about this, he murmured against her hair. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have exposed you like this. Janae pulled away, facing him with a mixture of pain and determination. It's not your fault. It's the world we live in, she said, wiping her tears. But I can't let this affect Sophia. Or Tiana. She's already read it, you know. A co-worker from the diner where she used to work sent her the link. She's devastated, thinking she's a burden to us. Edward felt a wave of protection and anger rise within him. The idea that they were hurting not only Janae, but also a sick teenager and an innocent child was unbearable. What do you want to do? He asked, holding her hands. Janae took a deep breath as if gathering courage. I think I need to leave, Edward. Find another place for me and Tiana. The statement hit Edward like a punch to the gut. No, the word came out stronger than he intended. He softened his tone before continuing. We can't let people like Veronica and this third-rate columnist dictate our lives, Janae. If you leave, they win. It's not about winning or losing, she argued, stepping back. It's about protecting what's most important. Sophia, she doesn't deserve to be the target of cruel gossip. And Tiana, already so fragile from her illness. And what will Sophia feel when you disappear from her life? Edward asked, knowing it was a low blow but unable to stop himself. After everything we've built? Janae closed her eyes for a moment, as if the question had physically struck her. It wouldn't be a disappearance, she finally replied. I would still see her, we wouldn't live in the same house. And us? Edward stepped closer again, touching her face gently. What would happen to what we're building? Before Janae could answer, they heard voices coming from the hallway. Sophia and Tiana appeared in the living room, the older girl leaning slightly on the younger one in a curious role reversal. Don't let my mom leave, Tiana said directly to Edward, surprising everyone. There were tears in her eyes. Please, Tiana, Janae exclaimed, shocked. Were you listening to our conversation? It wasn't on purpose, the teenager defended herself. We came to get water and we heard you talking about leaving. Sophia, who had been watching the scene with a confused expression, ran to Janae, clinging to her legs. Are you leaving, Jana? She asked, her voice trembling. Why? Don't you like me anymore? Of course I like you, my love. Janae knelt, hugging the girl. I love you. That will never change. Then why do you want to leave? Sophia insisted, with the simple, direct logic of children. Janae looked at Edward, seeking help to explain such a complex situation to a 6-year-old. Sophia, Edward began, kneeling beside them. Some people are saying mean things about Jana living here with us. Things that aren't true, and it's making her sad. What people? Sophia asked, frowning. Silly people who don't understand that families can be different, he replied, simplifying as much as possible. People who think there's only one right way to be happy. Then those people are dumb, Sophia declared, with the absolute conviction of childhood. If Jana leaves, I won't be happy. And neither will you, Daddy. You smile more now that Jana is here. The simple, honest statement brought tears to Janae's and Edward's eyes. And I won't be happy either, Tiana added, who had been silent until then. I like it here. All of you. Janae looked up at her daughter, surprised by the admission. Tiana had always been reserved, rarely expressing her feelings so directly. Tiana, sweetie. It's true, Mom, the teenager continued. I know it's complicated, that people will talk, but... She hesitated, searching for the words. For the first time since Dad left, it feels like we have a chance to be a real family. I don't want to give that up because of what other people think. The silence that followed was charged with emotion. The 4 people in the room, united by unexpected circumstances, by chance and coincidence, by pain and hope, formed an image that challenged conventions and expectations. And you, Janae? Edward asked finally. What do you want? Janae looked at each of them, Sophia clinging to her as if fearing to lose her at any moment, Tiana, with a rare vulnerability and honesty, Edward with eyes that revealed so much love it almost hurt to look. I want... Her voice failed. She took a deep breath and started again. I want to stay, with all of you. I want to try, even knowing it will be difficult. Edward felt a wave of relief so intense, his legs almost gave out. Sophia let out a cry of joy, hugging Janae with all the strength of her small arms. Even Tiana smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her pale face. But we need to be realistic, Janae continued, looking directly at Edward. People will keep talking. It could affect your business, your reputation. To hell with the business, he replied, with a conviction that surprised even himself. I have enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, even if the company closed tomorrow. What I don't have is a life without you. Without you all. Janae smiled, a smile that mixed disbelief and hope. Are you sure about this? Absolutely sure. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Edward answered, holding her hands. Except maybe that Sophia needs to take a bath before bed, or else she wakes up with hair that's impossible to comb. The joke broke the tension, making everyone laugh, including Sophia, who indignantly protested that her hair wasn't that hard to manage. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Edward and Janae returned to the balcony, their private refuge. The sea breeze brought with it the characteristic scent of Miami, salt, tropical vegetation, the promise of rain. I have something for you, Edward said, pulling a small box from his pocket. It's not what you're thinking, not yet. But it's a symbol. Janae opened the box, revealing a delicate silver necklace with a lily-shaped pendant. That's beautiful, she murmured, touching the jewel with her fingertips. Tiana told me you've always loved lilies, Edward explained, taking the necklace and moving behind her to put it on her neck. That your mother sees you're like one, strong and delicate at the same time. Janae smiled, touching the pendant that now rested on her collarbone. She's been saying that since I was little, she confirmed, in the hardest times when I thought I couldn't go on. Edward hugged her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, both watching the city lights reflected on the dark sea. We're going to face a lot together, he said softly. People like Veronica and Richard, malicious gossip, judgmental looks, but we're also going to build something special. Something worth fighting for. I'm scared, Edward, Janae confessed, leaning back against him. Not for me. I've faced prejudice my whole life. But for Sophia, for Tiana, and for you, your world is so different from mine. Not anymore, he corrected, turning her to face him. Now we have one world, ours, with our rules, our values, our definition of family. Janae smiled, touching his face with affection. That sounds like an impossible dream. Not so impossible, Edward assured her, kissing the palm of her hand. We just need to give it a chance. One day at a time, remember? Janae nodded, wrapping her arms around his neck. One day at a time, she agreed before kissing him. In the months that followed, many things changed. Edward sold the apartment in South Beach and bought a spacious house in Coral Gables, further from the center, with a large garden where Sophia could run freely and Tiana, now regaining her color and vigor, could study in the shade of a mango tree. Tiana's new school was a few blocks from the new house, and Sophia's school had been switched to a smaller, more welcoming institution, where their non-traditional family configuration was not a source of gossip or prejudice. Janae, encouraged by Edward and the girls, resumed her career as a teacher, Accepting a position at a nearby public school, she discovered she missed the classroom, the contact with children, the feeling of contributing to a better future. Edward restructured the company, delegating more responsibilities so he could spend more time at home. His relationship with Richard cooled considerably, but other partners proved more understanding, especially when they saw how much happier and more productive Edward had ever been. As for the columnist who had published the malicious text, it ironically ended up being their greatest positive publicity. After a report in a larger circulation newspaper about new family configurations, Edward, Janae, Sophia, and Tiana were invited for an interview. The resulting article, honest and sensitive, showed an unconventional but deeply united family, challenging prejudices and writing their own rules. On a Sunday afternoon, almost a year after Janae's arrival in their lives, the family was gathered in the garden of the new house. Tiana, now fully recovered from anemia, was playing soccer with Sophia, who squealed with excitement every time she managed to score an improvised goal. Edward was tending a barbecue grill, while Janae set the table on the veranda. "You know what I was thinking?" Edward commented, approaching her with 2 glasses of juice. They had given up wine due to a visit from Mrs. Josephine, who did not approve of alcoholic beverages. "I never thought it would be possible to be this happy again." Janae smiled, accepting the glass. "Even with all the difficulties?" she asked, referring to the occasional sideways glances they still received, the veiled comments, the doors that sometimes closed. "Especially with them," Edward replied, kissing her softly, "because every obstacle we overcome together only strengthens what we've built." On the other side of the garden, Sophia scored another goal and ran towards them, shouting, "Mom!" "Dad, did you see? Ty scored again." The naturalness with which the word "Mom" came from Sophia's lips no longer surprised anyone. It had been a gradual process, starting with occasional slips and eventually becoming the norm. Marcia would always be the mom in heaven, as Sophia explained to anyone who asked. Janae was the mom here. "I saw, my love," Janae replied, crouching down to receive the girl's excited hug. "You're becoming a pro. When are we going to tell them?" Edward asked, watching Sophia run back to continue the game with Tiana. Janae instinctively touched the small bump on her belly, still imperceptible under her loose blouse. "After dinner?" she suggested with a radiant smile. "When everyone is here." Edward nodded, putting his arm around her, both of them contemplating for a moment the silent miracle that was growing between them. A new life, a new beginning, another piece in the unexpected puzzle they had assembled together. There, under the blue Miami sky, surrounded by the scent of tropical flowers and the laughter of the girls, Edward and Janae understood that family was not defined by blood or traditions, but by the bonds we choose to cultivate, by the bridges we build over differences, by the love that insists on flourishing in the most unlikely of soils. And when night came, with everyone gathered around the bountiful table, with Mrs. Josephine telling stories of her youth, with Sophia and Tiana animatedly discussing whether the baby would be a boy or a girl, with complicit glances exchanged over glasses and plates, the certainty solidified. Sometimes in life, the greatest gifts come disguised as challenges, and the most beautiful stories begin with the most unlikely encounters. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Edward, Janae, Sophia, and Tiana has touched your hearts. To discover more narratives that explore the different ways of loving and building families, we have prepared a special playlist, Unexpected Bonds. Find it by clicking the link on the left. If this journey of overcoming and love has moved you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring unique stories that celebrate the diversity of human feelings. And have you ever experienced or witnessed an unlikely encounter that transformed lives? Share your experiences in the comments. We'd love to hear your own stories of unexpected bonds.